In this video, I'm going to create the simplest remoted component example I can possibly think of. We'll use this as a foundation. We'll build on these concepts in future videos. The first thing that we're going to do is create a component that has a single method on it. And this component is going to inherit from a class that will make it marshal by reference. Do you remember what marshal by reference means? If you watch a previous video, you'll know that marshal by reference means that when the component's code runs, it'll be run on the server that actually hosts that component. So that's the second thing we'll do. We'll create a host application that will load the component and then make it available to be accessed remotely. And then the third thing we'll do is create a client application that's going to call the host's URL, and it's going to access a specific method on the remoted component. The only, in this case, method that's on that component. So let's go ahead and start our sample here. I'm going to create a new blank solution, and we'll call this simple remoting. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new project to it, and we're going to call this, let's go ahead and select this class library, call it business objects, and I want to put this actually in the simple remoting folder, or else they'll all get separated. I want to keep them all together in the same solutions folder. So that should do it. Business objects, simple remoting, looks great. I'm going to click OK, and we're going to create a public class called customer. The very first thing that I'm going to do is paste in a line of code that says inherit system.marshal-by-ref object. By inheriting from this class, our object will now run in the host's process on the server instead of on the client's process or in the client's application or server. The next thing we will do here is paste in some more code. We created two private member variables, and in our constructor public sub new, we set those values by default. And since we're going to be hosting our component in a VB console application, we're going to write out to the console window object is now created. And we'll do that throughout the time when we create various examples for this series so that you can see when the objects are actually instantiated. Now the next thing I do is actually paste in the function that I create called getMessage. And essentially, let me walk you through it real quick here. Let me move this over. You pass in a string called name into this getMessage, and I either want to return one of two things to the calling application. Either, hi Jim, you are the first person in line, or I want to return back, hi Jim, there are 3, 4 people in line ahead of you, and Steve is directly in front. So every time we call this getMessage method, what I want to do is save off the name that was passed in, and I also want to increment how many people are currently in line now. Now this isn't a very full-featured example, but what it will allow us to do is to notice the state of the component. So the component's going to be hosted by our console application, and every time we run a client application, will it create a brand new instance of our component? Well, in this case, no. This is a singleton, so it will actually keep it in memory until a period of time has elapsed and nobody's actually called the component, in which case the garbage collector comes through and cleans it out. But I digress. So what we want to do here is save what we got and actually build our solution, make sure it all compiles, because we are going to want to create a reference to it in our solution. So the next thing I want to do now is add another project to our solution. Let me do add new project, and this time we're going to create a console application, and we're going to put it in, we're going to call it just host. This is a host application. Now make sure that it's in simple remoting / host on your computer, and click OK. And so here we have just the outline for a simple Windows console. Very first thing I need to do is go to Project, Add Reference, and there's two things I need a reference to. The very first one is the system.runtime.remoting. I'm going to hit Select here so that it puts it in the Selected Components window near the bottom. And then I'm going to go to Projects, and I'm going to make sure Business Objects is selected, hit the Select button. So that means I'm going to create a reference to these two objects. And I click OK. And you can see in my Solution Explorer now under References for my host project that I now have a System Runtime Remoting, and I also have a reference to the business objects. Very good. So the first thing I want to do is import some namespaces so that I don't have to type so much in my code example. And I've also made some notes out here to the right-hand side of why we are creating an import statement for each one of these, and this will become more clear in just a few moments. And I've also got just some comments here you may want to read over at some point. So the very first thing I want to do in the submain is actually write out to the console window when the host is started, and then I'm going to create and register a channel. I send into the constructor of the TCP channel class a number, and this number has to be between like 0 and 100,000. And obviously you wouldn't want to use any of the ports that are well known, like 80 or 24 or anything like that. You should keep your port numbers pretty high. And there's already a standard in like the IANA.org, I believe it is, that will tell you what's safe for your application to use. But you want to use an unused port. And I just picked out a random number, 7777. You can choose whatever you want. And then once I do that, I register that new channel that I created with the register channel method. Basically, we're telling the remoting infrastructure how we want to communicate our remoting messages. We'll use TCP on that channel. Paste in some more code here. And this time we're going to actually create an instance of our customer class we created just a few moments ago. And then we call remotingservices.marshal. We pass in the instance of our class, and we pass in the actual URI that we'll want to use whenever somebody wants to call our component. So whenever they have a URL, this will have to be part of that URL. And we'll show you when we build the client what that URL will need to look like. But this word customer will have to definitely be a part of it. And this is what distinguishes this particular service from any of the other services that are running on the exact same box. And then I've got some more information here that we could have actually captured a reference that this returns a objref instance, which allows us to get information about what's going to be marshaled. I'll just let you read that and even consult help. And then if you want to end the host application, we'll just do a console read line, and then the application will finish. So the next thing we're going to want to do is, we'll go ahead and save this. We're going to add one more project to our solution, and we're just going to call this client. Click OK. And we're going to want to do the exact same thing we did just a moment ago. We're going to go to Project, Add Reference. We're going to create a reference to system.runtime.remoting. We'll select that, and we'll go to our projects, select Business Objects, select, and make sure we have both of those selected. First thing I'm going to do is import some namespaces so we don't have to type so much. Now, just a moment ago, we said that whenever we call the URL, that word customer had to be part of the URI, or the unique name for that. So as you can see here, I'm using the TCP : // So that is the channel that we're going to use. This is the port that we're going to use, so localhost : 7777, and then we're going to pass in the URI customer. So that will uniquely identify which service on localhost that we want to use. I want to make one thing clear as well. We're going to run all three of these applications, or the two applications in the component, on the same machine. We could just as easily change where we want to point to by giving this a IP address on our server, or giving this an internet address like whatever.com colon 7777. Whatever resolves to a real network address will work in this instance. So we're going to use that client URL in our first line of code that we have. We're actually going to create a transparent proxy by calling the remotingservices.connect. So we get an instance of our customer object, dimcust, as customer, and what will be returned is whatever we get back from our remotingservices.connect. We give the type of customer, and then we pass in that constant, that URL that we defined just a moment ago, and then we convert that, C-type it, to type customer. Okay, so this looks really funky, but all that's happening right here is that we're calling remotingservices.connect, passing in the type customer and the URL where it can be found, and then converting the type of everything that's returned from the connect to type customer here at the end. And then we return that instance and save it into our cust object. So now we allow our user to actually input their name into the client. So enter your name, then push the enter key, and we do a console read line and save that result into sname. Then the next thing we do, paste in some more code here, and we'll call the actual getMessage method that we defined in our object. We'll pass in the name. So we have our transparent proxy represented by the cust object that was returned from our remotingservices.connect. Remember, we have a transparent proxy. Transparent proxy, again, fakes out our client application. It makes it think that we have a real instance of a real object. And then we pass in the name. Could be Jim, Steve, whatever. And then we get the result of this and then print it out. And then finally, what we'll do is actually allow the user to quit the application. Let's go ahead and save this and build our entire solution. Looks like all three did just fine. Now we're not going to be able to use the entire application. We're not going to be able to just hit run like we normally do because we have two applications we need to run at the same time. So what I'm going to do is open up our handy Windows Explorer. We're going to find our new application, Simple Remoting. We're going to go to the host application, to the bin directory, and we'll double click on our host application. It says host started, and notice that immediately the object is created. Now what we've done is we've created the simplest example that I could possibly think of. At this point, we haven't gotten into server-activated versus client-activated Marshall by reference objects. We haven't gotten into a specific server-activated type, whether it's singleton or single call, none of that stuff. Again, all we want to do is illustrate some ideas here, and we're going to show you some better code that allows you to be more specific with the way that you create these objects in the host application. So at any rate, we have ours running, so we'll just leave this running right here. And then what I'll do, I'll come over here to our Solution Explorer. We'll set a breakpoint in our client right here, and I'm going to mark this as our startup project, set as startup project, so it'll be bold, and then I'll hit run. Okay, so let's pull this down and step through our code. So this is our very first line of code. Sorry about that. Here we go. Where we're actually going to connect and create a transparent proxy. Okay, so let's see. Nothing really changed in our server. So it'll say enter your name, and press any key, and we'll type in Jim. Then I'll hit enter. And we're going to call get message. Notice when we do that our host application now says get message was called. Great. And we can hover our mouse cursor over and it says, hi Jim, you're the first person in line. Excellent. We'll print that out to the client. Client, hi Jim, you're the first person in line. And then we'll just hit F5 to run the rest of it. So now it says hit enter to quit on the client. Now notice, even though we quit the client, that our server, our host, is still running. So this time, let's go ahead and get rid of the breakpoint and just run it again. And here we go. This time we'll type in Steve. Hi Steve, there's one in line ahead of you and Jim is currently in front. Hit the enter key to quit, and then we'll run it one more time. We'll type in Jill this time. Hi Jill, there's two people in line ahead of you and Steve is directly in front. Hit the enter key to quit. Notice each time the get message was called on the host application. So there you have it. We've created this most simple remoting example that I can think of. We took a long time to explain some things, so I hope you didn't get too bored during the process. Just want to make sure that you completely understood what was going on. Now what we're going to do in the future videos is use a slightly different method where we're going to be more specific with the type, whether it's server activated or client activated. We'll show you the difference between the two. And then also we're going to be more discerning with things like the server activated type, whether it's singleton or single call. We'll show a Marshall by value example, but we'll use the same basic structure in all of our examples where we create a component and then we create two different a host, which is essentially a console application, a client, which is a console application. So I hope that you understood a little bit of what was going on, that you understand that there's more that we're going to cover in the next couple of videos, but you start getting a picture of how this works, how you have to create the component, and it has to either inherit from something or you have to designate it in some way to be remoted, and then how you had to create a hosting application that can actually listen on a particular URL for a request that comes in, and then how you were able to create a client application that knew what URL to call and created a transparent proxy and was able to then call the code on the server. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed this video.